Hello and welcome to Lyra Nara. The title of today's video is Cancer Dogmas and Why They Cost Millions of Lives. And as the title already suggests, we're going to discuss all of the cancer research, where it has been proven wrong and why we haven't come to any real cure yet, and why the numbers are still on the rise despite all of the billions that we spend yearly on cancer research. But not only that, we're gonna show you other theories that are very well researched and very well documented, which might be more correct than the dogmas that we believe in today. We're gonna explain to you what is happening in your body and also, of course, in the end, show you solutions, what you can do in order to take on your cancer. And the whole purpose of this presentation is to take away the anxiety that you experience when you get this very bad diagnosis of cancer. You don't have to be afraid, and I'm sure by the end of this presentation you will agree with me. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's not waste any more time and dive right into it. And I would like to begin by showing you this graph, which clearly illustrates the problem. Despite the billions and billions that we spend on cancer research yearly, the numbers, as you can see, are still on the rise, and there is no end in sight and no solution. So let's try to explain what keeps us back in cancer research, in our opinion, and why we haven't found a solution yet. Let's talk about the dogmas. And as I've mentioned in the introduction, the whole purpose of this presentation is to take away your anxiety and panic when you receive a cancer diagnosis, and to show you better ways of understanding and dealing with cancer. Because people do address and perceive cancer diagnoses only emotionally, or mostly emotionally, and not rationally. It brings the fear up in you. The first reaction driven by this fear of having a tumor in the body is to remove the cancer by all means. And most patients who visit an oncologist carry out a normal life and they feel healthy before they get this diagnosis, most of them. Once, however, the oncologist presents the patient with the cancer diagnosis and a therapy plan that is based on surgery, chemo, and radiation, almost instantly the patient becomes the victim of his or her own horrifying anxiety about a mutilating, toxifying treatment. And all these proposed procedures are known to be unhealthy and harmful, and the statistics actually clearly show that they are not very successful. And guess what's the response in over 90% of patients? Hey, yes, please do this harmful and mutilating treatments to me. It's a hypnotic answer to commit actually a kind of assisted suicide. And cancer diagnoses are based on doubtful procedures such as biopsies, old-fashioned parameters such as the PSA parameters, or dogmatic genetic markers, and many are momentary, unrealistic interpretations of images. Sometimes these are driven by economical reasons, and all the time they may cost your life. So let's see in more detail which physiological changes happen almost instantly in your body when you get the cancer diagnosis, and which are the real health consequences. When you receive the cancer diagnosis, usually two major organs within your body are instantly affected by this diagnosis, and those are your kidneys and your lungs. And you will see in the course of this presentation why that is so. In a second phase, you may become also the victim of a so-called self-devaluation conflict that manifests in your connective tissue in the shape of lymphatic ganglions, and in your bones as a bone sarcoma, and many times is related to pain. In evolutionary terms, the kidney collecting tubules are the oldest tissue of the kidneys. And like the intestinal cells that digest the so-called food morsel, the biological function of the kidney tubules is to absorb or retain and digest this water morsel. And the kidney collecting tubules consist of intestinal cylinder epithelium that originate from the endoderm and are controlled from your brainstem. The biological conflict that is linked to the kidney collecting tubules originates at a time when life existed only in the ocean, and being thrust out of this water environment created a life-threatening situation. And this kind of distress also concerns human life, because water is the primordial home of all living organisms. We humans experience the conflict of feeling like a fish out of water when we are unexpectedly swept out of our familiar surroundings or when we lose our pack. We refer to the conflict of the kidney collecting tubules as an abandonment conflict, an existence conflict, or a so-called refugee conflict. An existence conflict is a fear of losing one's life, equal to the fish out of water in danger of dying. And this fear is often triggered by a cancer diagnosis or a negative prognosis associated with your life being at stake. Waiting in an emergency room, being in an ambulance, hospitalization, undergoing chemo treatment, surgery, not feeling cared for, a lack of support by doctors, nurses, or relatives also evoke this existence and abandonment conflicts. And the fear of having to go to the hospital might already activate this type of conflict. An existence conflict also relates to your livelihood. The feeling behind the conflicts is, I have lost everything, or I am in danger of losing everything. And this could be the loss of a workplace, financial losses, loss of a home, or the loss of a person who provides security economically or emotionally for you. And as you might know already, to any type of conflict, there are two phases, this conflict active phase and the resolution phase. Well, during the existence conflict active phase, the cells in the kidney tubules proportionally proliferate to the intensity of the conflict. And this is often later diagnosed as a kidney carcinoma. The biological purpose of the cell proliferation is to close the urine excretion filters in order to withhold water so that the organism has a better survival chance. This innate water retention program is vital because without water all metabolic processes stop functioning, and during this phase your symptoms are therefore water retention with multiple edemas, elevated uric acid levels with significant impacts on your connective tissue, as well as body toxicity, decrease of urine output, significantly elevated level of urea and creatinine, and this is also related to the muscle weakness and the lack of energy you might feel. Typical signs of water retention are baggy eyes, swollen hands, swollen feet and ankles, and a weight gain. And the retained water is predominantly stored in the fat tissue, mainly in the abdominal area. In this case, obesity is of course not caused by excess body fat, but by this excess accumulation of water that is a result of the lasting conflict activity. The existence conflict resolution is, it will be very difficult to find a resolution to this existence conflict when you are diagnosed with cancer or any other fatal illness, or that you perceive as a fatal illness or condition, under continuous conventional cancer treatment. Therefore, so many cancer patients die of kidney failure. The resolution of this existence conflict means cancer remission. And during the healing phase of the kidney syndrome, the retained water is immediately released through the unaffected calyces. And depending on the degree of water retention, the elimination of urine could be profuse. Standard medicine views this copious urination, called polyuria, as abnormal and pathological. With our knowledge, we welcome this urinary phase with great relief, however. With the syndrome, the autonomic nervous system is in the so-called sympathicotonia and vagotonia at the same time. And thus the extra sleep, the fatigue and the good appetite are vital for healing, and they are disrupted by the conflict active state of stress with little appetite and difficulty sleeping. And the result is nervous exhaustion, weight loss as well as energy loss. So what are the consequences of this kidney syndrome? Well, first, increased pain due to the enlarged swelling that leads to the use of stronger pain medications such as morphine usually. Harmless swellings might also turn into a complicated case, causing obstructions, for example, in the colon or in the bile ducts, requiring surgery and hospitalization. And this often, of course, triggers further existence conflicts with the result of even more fluid accumulation in the affected organ. Healing tumors, for example, in the lungs, bronchi, your liver, pancreas, your colon, your thyroid, your breast, your cervix, ovaries, prostate, or testicles increase in size. And this is when conventional medicine speaks of so-called fast-growing or aggressive cancers. Growths also that have encapsulated, so that which are already cold and not active cancers anymore, appear bigger and might be detected during a routine medical checkup or follow-up examination such as a mammography or colonoscopy. Also, the caverns that have remained as a result of the prolonged healing process, or so-called hanging healing, for example in your breast glands, increase with water retention, presenting themselves now as cysts. And cysts such as liver cysts, thyroid cysts, ovarian, testicular or kidney cysts become larger and might even burst. And the fluid that is released into the neighboring area can lead to acute complications. An effusion, for example, in the pleura, peritoneum or pericardium can cause a serious medical condition due to the additional water that is stored in the already fluid-filled membrane. Skin conditions also that involve the underskin or the epidermis become more dramatic, inflammations become more severe, arthritic conditions are more painful, and this is all due to the increased swelling with water retention. Arthritis becomes gout, bronchitis becomes pneumonia, hepatitis with syndrome causes hepatomegaly, which is a liver enlargement, which the person might not be able to survive, particularly with continuous conflict relapses and ascites formation. Also, the brain edema that develops parallel to the healing organ takes up additional fluid. And the swelling might even be diagnosed as a brain tumor. Excessive swelling in the brain causes extreme brain pressure, of course, and that leads potentially to a coma or even death. And with a large brain edema, a heart attack might be so severe that a person does not survive it as well. A big edema in close vicinity to a ventricle, which is a brain cavity, can cause also internal hydrocephalus. In the brainstem, a large edema that develops in the vicinity of the lung relays might press onto the respiratory center, which is also life-threatening. In general, all medications with a stimulating effect, including cortisone, cytostatic drugs, and morphine, exacerbate the symptoms of the conflict-active phase. In case of an abandonment or existence conflict that involves your kidneys collecting tubules within them, therefore they will increase their water retention. Next, let's address what a cancer diagnosis can do to your lungs. The biological conflict that is linked to the lung alveoli is the death-fright conflict, because in biological terms, the death panic is equated with not being able to breathe. And the control center on the right side of the brainstem relates to not being able to catch the air morsel, that is, not being able to inhale. The control center on the left side of the brainstem relates to not being able to eliminate the air morsel, that is, not being able to exhale, for example, due to hyperventilation. A death fright can be experienced in any life-threatening situation, for example, in the course of an accident or during a medical emergency. By far the most common death fright conflict, however, is brought on by a diagnosis shock, particularly by a fatal diagnosis such as cancer that hits you like a death sentence. Statements by your physician such as the cancer is malignant, inoperable, aggressive, invasive, metastasizing, or remarks like you have only 6 months to live and other verdicts of this kind can evoke an acute death panic. And the same holds true for negative prognosis and test results that are based on medical checkups. We also have to take into account potential self-diagnosis shocks that are triggered. For instance, when you detect a lump, let's say in your breast, when there is blood in your stool, in the urine or in the vagina, or with other symptoms that are associated with having cancer, which of course is perceived as a deadly disease. So looking for information about a particular symptom on the internet with countless websites propagating the concept of malignant diseases can easily activate also a death-flight conflict. And during the conflict active phase, the lung alveoli cells proliferate proportionally to the intensity of the conflict. The biological purpose of the cell increase is to improve the function of the lungs by supplying the organism with more oxygen so that the individual is in a better position to escape from this life-threatening situation. With prolonged conflict activity, the flat-growing lung nodules, the absorptive type, referred to as a lung cancer, develop as a result of the continuing cell augmentation. So you can compare this with lung cancer that is related to the bronchi. And if the rate of cell division exceeds a certain limit, conventional medicine considers the cancer as being malignant. A death fright can be experienced for one's own life or for the life of others, such as your family members, a beloved friend, or even a pet. A single lung nodule forms if you have suffered a conflict with or for another person or an animal. Two nodules develop for two people, for example with a death fright for both parents, and three nodules for three people, and so forth. Multiple lung nodules covering both lungs reveal that a death fright conflict relates to yourself, and the same principle applies to the liver nodules. Since there are no noticeable symptoms during the conflict active phase, the lung nodules are at this point only detected through routine medical checkups or follow-ups and other examinations. Because of today's increased pressure for preventive screening and more sophisticated diagnostic tools that we have, particularly with the invention of MRIs and mammograms, a lot more cancers are detected. Consequently, many more people suffer these death-fright conflicts. And this explains why lung cancer is still the most frequent cancer in spite of a significant decrease in the number of smokers, and why even heavy smokers don't necessarily develop lung cancer or any cancer for that matter. Lung x-rays are usually performed after the diagnosis of cancer, such as breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, or other types of cancer. And the time lapse between the diagnosis and further tests is therefore crucial, because it is during this period that the lung nodules develop. Repeated follow-up exams keep this death-fright conflict active, so it becomes a so-called hanging conflict. And conventional medicine interprets the nodules as a metastasizing cancer. In reality, however, the lung cancer was caused by the death-fright conflict over the devastating diagnosis of the first cancer, resulting in a new that is in a secondary cancer. Okay, so now that we have gained a better understanding of the psychosomatic conflicts that cause cancer and all of the symptoms that might appear depending on the conflict phase, let's talk about some of the dogmas that are persistent in cancer research and why some of them are wrong and have been proven to be wrong, and what we can do about it. So dogma number one is that oncology is a science, even though oncology is mostly based on trials and errors. Dogma number two is sometimes cancer researchers at R&D institutes or universities, they make mistakes as well. So we think they don't make mistakes, but for example, it was previously believed that we have over 100,000 genes, and this was demonstrated to be entirely false. So even those great doctors, they make mistakes. Dogma number 3 is we know that cancer causes are always found in the genes and genetic mutations. You hear this all the time. This is due to genetic mutations, and this is actually false. You can implant a cancerous cell into a healthy host, and cancer will not automatically grow in that host, and this has been proven. Dogma number 4 is that your immune system plays an important role in treating cancer. Well, if that is so, why do AIDS patients or patients with transplanted organs or patients with a strongly suppressed immune system, why don't they all develop cancer? Dogma number 5 is that smoking leads to lung cancer. Statistics, however, show that only 0.225% of smokers get lung cancer. And this is not meant to encourage you to smoke, of course, but those are just the numbers. Majority actually of smokers don't get lung cancer. Why? Also, meat eaters are supposed to develop more colon cancer. The fact is, though, that only 0.125% of meat eaters develop colon cancer. There is also the belief that alcohol leads to liver cancer. However, only 0.024% of moderate drinkers of alcohol get liver cancer. Dogma number 8. There are viral oncogenes such as the Helicobacter pylori or the papillomavirus. But not even 0.001% of the people who have these viruses develop cancer. Another dogma is that environmental toxins lead to cancer. However, this has never been proven by statistical data. It's just an idea, it's a supposition. Professor Otto Warburg, who won the Nobel Prize, made in the following statement in 1952, quote, "You can trigger cancer with tar, but tar is not a cancer cause. You can trigger cancer with different viruses, but these viruses are not a cancer cause. The cancer-inducing agents may activate pre-existing cancer cells in your body. They do not create new cell art known as mutated cells." End quote. So mutations are not the beginning of a cancer. Mutated cells are the result of different factors and defense mechanisms the body must take to save your life. And Dr. Hammer proved clearly that every disease is caused by a conflict, a psycho-emotional shock that we've discussed already, that catches the individual completely off guard. Next, let's talk a little bit more in depth about some of the most persistent dogmas in cancer research. First up, the cancer genetic theory. That was actually never experimentally confirmed, and as you will see, there are facts that contradict it clearly. For example, one of the theories is that BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes supposedly increase the risk of breast cancer by more than 87%, and over 60% of women are more exposed to get ovary and uterus cancer when they have those two genes in them. This theory, however, is contradicted by the fact that, for example, Ashkenazi women have these genes in more than 50% of their population, but they are not showing more breast cancer occurrences. Also, testis cancer is considered to be induced by mutations on the chromosomes 5, 6, and 12. Oncologists say that if you have these mutations, you are exposed by more than 90% to have testis cancer. However, this was also never confirmed experimentally. Professor Dr. G. Schwartz demonstrated that when you get a radiation therapy, the cell's phosphatide in the erythrocyte's membrane is destroyed, and Dr. Seeger found in the histochemical cancerogenic initial phase the same cancerogenic. There are also experiments that clearly contradict this genetic theory. For example, they did experiments with frogs, and they cloned a tadpole from a renal tumor cell from a frog. And despite them cloning it from a cancerous cell, the tadpole that they created was without a tumor, had a well-formed head, body, and tail. Another theory that you will hear very often is that cancer is a metabolic disease. Well, is it? In 1956, Otto Warburg discovered the so-called Warburg effect, and according to him, cancer arises from damages at the level of cellular respiration happening in the mitochondrial cells. The normal energy that is produced by a healthy cell per one molecule of glucose is 36 ATP, which equals 56 kilojoules. And this is generated during glycolysis of food and oxygenation or phosphorylation of the so-called pyruvate during a healthy mitochondrial respiration. When cancer arises, however, this energy diminishes because the digestion switches to a fermentation state, which is a primitive way of creating energy that is characteristic for single-cell organisms, which are primitive, less differentiated organisms. Cancer cells continue to ferment lactate in the presence of oxygen then. And this fermentation collapses the ATP energy. So in a cancerous cells, the glucose uptake and the glycolysis proceed about 10 times faster than in a non-cancerous tissue. And tumor cells commonly experience so-called hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen, because they initially lack an extensive capillary network to supply the tumor with oxygen brought by the bloodstream. The high glycolytic rate may also result in part from smaller numbers of mitochondria in tumor cells that generate less ATP. So the cancer cells kidnap ATP from the health cells therefore. In some cases, the tumor cells overproduce several glycolytic enzymes, committing the cells to a continuous glycolysis. HIF1 is a protein that stimulates the activity of 8 glycolytic enzymes, giving the tumors the capacity to survive anaerobic conditions, which means conditions with a lack of oxygen, and therefore most of the chemo drugs and cytostatic remedies must generate in situ ROS, which are reactive oxygen species. Next, let's talk about mutations. So about 2 billion years ago, life supposedly started to develop on planet Earth, and it happened in water. As there was no oxygen, the energy was generated anaerobically through fermentation of glucose. Single-cell organisms known as eukaryotes and prokaryotes, today better known as protozoa, developed in this environment. About 800 million years ago, this protozoa and the two cell bodies known as protists concluded, so to speak, a survival deal with each other with the more advanced multicellular bacterial cells. Thus, lactate, created through fermentation, was furnished by the inferior organisms, and 80 times more energy was created using oxygen by the new, more performant bacterial organisms. And this evolution happened through an engulfing process of the aggressive single-cellular bodies and not through elimination of their hereditary mass, so of their genes. The repressor genes are now controlling the new body, but the inferior genetic mass did not disappear. We all have therefore protozoa in us today. When cancer occurs, these primitive single-cellular bodies are reactivated. They're getting bold, so to speak, and the first thing they do is to change the digestion into an anaerobic fermentation of glucose that is similar to the nourishing and energetic processes they had when they were still living in water. Cancer is therefore not a cellular mutation. It is a revival of archaic potencies triggered by cancer triggers that change the rank order in your system. And this evolution model answers all unanswered questions such as what is cancer, how does it happen that all living beings on this planet can develop cancer, and what is the common characteristic of all tumors. In 1951, Otto Warburg and two American scientists called Harry Goldblatt and Gladys Cameron postulated that cancer cells occur through oxygen deprivation of normal cells, which awakens the atavistic, primitive, aggressive cells, and thus the cancer does not accrue through cellular mutations. It is much more correct to say that it is that deprivation of oxygen reactivates the atavist cells, which is, of course, as we've discussed, the first organisms on this planet, which are the aggressive glucose burners, the protozoa. So what does make cancer grow? Well, the human body is energy and information that is manifested in a condensed form, which we perceive as our physical body. In order to stay alive and healthy, this energy must flow unhindered throughout our whole body. And therefore, healthy cells have a bipolar structure. They work like a battery. The life energy, also known as ki or prana energy, flows freely through these bipolar cells. The positive pole is the top of the body, including visceral organs and the left side of the body. And the negative pole is the bottom of the body, the limbs, and the right side of the body. Maintaining this bipolar structure allows the cells to permanently create the living energy. Sick cells, on the other hand, are non-polar, so they are either plus or minus, and this type of cells, the sick cells, neither let the energy flow through, nor do they create energy. Instead, they consume energy from the other cells at a rate that is up to 800 times higher than normal. Also, all healthy cells communicate among themselves. The sick cells, however, are isolated. They cannot communicate or be seen by the immune system. So, polarization, cell polarization influences cancer growth. What else? Well, all chronic diseases as well as degenerative processes develop in an acidic milieu. And three parameters are important here: the pH value, the redox potential, and the electrical conductivity in your blood, your urine, and your saliva. pH values determine, of course, the acidity and alkalinity of the body. Ideally, the blood pH should be and is always at 7.35 to 7.45 pH. Saliva at 6.5, and urine pH varies during the day. However, an average is at about 6.8 pH. The RH2 or redox potential shows the electron surplus at specific pH values and the value of the oxygen-hydrogen partial pressure on a scale of 0 to 42, with a neutral value at 28, where the partial pressure of hydrogen is equal to that of oxygen. Biologically ideal values for the redox potential are between 22 and 24 for all of the body fluids, the blood and saliva. Electrical conductivity is a result of electrolytes, meaning the minerals in your body. It's also interesting to take a look at human embryo development to gain a better understanding, because the human embryo development follows all evolutionary stages. It is still anaerobic. The embryo lives in the so-called amniotic fluid, which has the same chemical composition, by the way, as our blood and the ocean's water. Anaerobic developments, therefore, are still necessary to create life. I would also like you to understand that diseases are meaningful biological processes. And hear me out on that before you say that sounds totally crazy. All diseases at the beginning are meaningful biological processes to correct your body functions and actually sustain life. However, if you do not take the right actions, those diseases can kill you in the end. It is for you, so to speak, therefore, the disease is a constant ramp towards evolution and enlightenment in your own life. It is a sign that you have to change something. For example, high blood pressure. A high blood pressure at the beginning is a meaningful biological process to save your life, but at the end it can kill you. High blood pressure improves cellular tissue and organ blood circulation, which means your organs are better nourished, they have less toxicity, and the blood vessels show less plaque, so because they are better flushed. It is, however, only a temporary help which the body employs in order to solve the problems. It invites you only to analyze your real situation and to take necessary measures to restore your autoregulation and homeostasis and change your lifestyle before the high blood pressure will do you in. Cancer. At the beginning, the cancer cells help you lower the blood sugar because the cancer cells consume more sugar than normal cells. They also block and metabolize toxins in tumors, encapsulate fungi, and inform you through the psychosomatic body that it is time to change your lifestyle and solve your psycho-emotional as well as social conflicts. Other meaningful changes or diseases are hypoxia, adrenaline deficiency, dysregulation of the cytochrome oxidase, disbalance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and calcium pump, hypothermia, lymphocyte changes, cholesterol changes, behavioral and mood changes. All of those are signals that tell you it is time to change. And if you don't, they can lead to death. Mitochondria. Why, for example, have you ever asked yourself, does the heart never develop cancer? Well, because the cellular membrane of the heart cells does not easily change its membrane potential and stays at an almost constant 70 millivolts. And this is possible due to the strong electrical polarized properties of the heart cells. Cancer develops when the membrane potential is at around only 20 millivolts. So cancer cells are also, as we've learned, not polarized. They are either plus plus or minus minus, and thus there is no electrical current that flows through them. Healthy cells, on the other hand, are dipoles, like a battery with a plus and a minus pole, and this is the driving life force in all organs like your heart, your brain, your blood, your pancreas, etc. Let's also have a look at another very interesting cancer theory that was proposed and promoted by W.FRYDA. One of the most common characteristics which all previously mentioned causes and the ones not named here share in favor of the formation of a cancer is that they all produce either permanent stress, overstress, or distress to the living organism. The common denominator for all routes of distress and types of stress is a slowly decreasing adrenaline production. Carcinoma patients do not produce enough adrenaline or even none at all, and this is well known. Adrenaline is the counterpart to insulin, and it is responsible for the glycogenolysis in the cells. Whereas insulin incorporates sugar in the cells, adrenaline remobilizes it from the cells if necessary and provides it for the muscles. When the adrenaline production comes to an end, sugar will no longer be catabolized. And this leads to an increasing repletion, first of many and later of all body cells. Normally, excessive sugar is simply transformed into fat, which however will no longer work in case of a relatively high excess of insulin and when there is a surplus of fatty acids in the cells where they cannot be metabolized anymore. An excess of free sugar instead of glycogen is the result, and a high amount of noradrenaline can cause a permanent vasoconstriction with a respective oxygen deficiency. And this fact explains why the development of a first anaerobic cancer cell must result from it. Adrenaline deficiency with excessive sugar in the cells and oxygen deficiency in the entire organism necessarily leads to the event that at least in one weakening place, one cell becomes distressed to a point that it has to quit its normal metabolism and switch to this fermentation state that we've discussed. And the dormant protozoa, they of course sense their chance and they burst into life, and together with other pathogens they start penetrating your body, and this is where the cancer has already started. The first fermenting cell now produces so-called laboratory lactic acid, a substance that increases the mitoserates in the cell unit up to 8-fold, and the prime tumor developing from this helps the organism with its sugar problem. And this is due to the fact that a patient is in a situation of a diabetic metabolism as a result of the cell's overload with sugar. The procured sugar has no more space in the cells, may no longer be transformed into fats, and circulates in the blood, therefore. And this hyperglycemia was found in tumor patients even years before the actual tumor was discovered. Let's also discuss this protozoa more in depth, because there is clear proof that indicates that cancer is a microparasitic infection. From 1965 to 1990, Dr. Alfons Weber developed this theory about the microparasitic origin of cancer and all acute and chronic health conditions. He postulated and experimentally, without a doubt, demonstrated that the real cause of cancer is the plasmodial parasitic blood infection, the 2 billion-year-old single cells that we have discussed called protozoa. Dr. Weber's work is based on thousands of biological in vitro as well as in vivo experiments with tissues and blood samples collected from cancer patients during their life and even after their death. So it's very well documented, and he found out that all of this blood and tissue tests confirmed the presence of these microparasites. Dr. Weber's microparasitic theory was widely supported by its time by many studies and experiments done by renowned biologists and doctors such as the doctors and scientists from the Robert Koch Institute, the Pasteur Institute, Tamara Lebedeva, the microbiology department of the Max von Pettenkofer Institute, today part of the Medicine University of Munich, Germany, Dr. Alan Cantwell, Professor Dr. Peter Duisburg, Sir Henry Britlin, Wilhelm Reich, etc., etc. And you can learn more about this by reading a book that is called A Cancer Microbe. Dr. Weber's conclusion was that the protozoa are more pathogenic than any bacteria and fungi together, and that they are the real cause of cancer and other chronic diseases such as malaria, Lyme disease, mycoplasma, babesia, hepatitis, etc. Dr. Weber wrote two very important books about this subject. In 1969 he published About the Causes of Cancer Disease, and in 1970 he published Pathogenic Protozoa in Blood, Organs and Tumors Tissue. If you want to know more about this subject, I highly recommend that you read those books. And as we've already touched upon, those microparasites are the original single-cell bodies. And the plasmodial-like parasites are very difficult to be identified in regular blood lab work because they are hidden inside of the red blood cells in the erythrocytes. However, we've made already videos where we show you live footage and ways in which you can detect those microparasites in a blood test, and all of their movements, how they replicate. I'm gonna link it in the description box below for you. Cancer. So, protozoa are defined as a group of unicellular eukaryotic organisms. Protozoa are single-celled organisms with animal-like behavior such as motility and predation, nutrition and excretion, as well as sexual and asexual proliferations. And members of the protozoa are the so-called ciliates, the amoebae, and the flagellates, amongst others. And these microparasites live in the red blood cells, as we've mentioned already, in the erythrocytes, where they proliferate and multiply. Then they practically break out through the capillaries by dissolving the capillary walls using their own lysosome enzymes. At this stage, the parasites invasively migrate extravascularly into the connective tissue matrix and the organ's parenchyma, creating what we know today as degenerative or autoimmune diseases. The final stage of this protozoa infection is marked by the invasion of the stem cells. The first defense mechanism of the stem cells is, of course, vacuolization. So they try to enclose those parasites in small blisters. But when there are too many vacuoles, or too many of those parasites, the stem cells start dividing to minimize the number of vacuoles that are stuffed with parasites inside of them. And this is known as mitosis and leads to hyperplasia. And once the nutrients for the parasites that are kept enclosed in those stem cells vacuoles have dried up, the stem cells start dividing to reduce the number of parasites per cell, or there is a stem cell apoptosis, so cell death due to the toxicity and the starvation that has been created in the cell. And at this stage, the microparasites, of course, are freed again into your bloodstream. And depending on the organs that are invaded and the general health state of the patient, the first symptoms appear in form of skin rashes, eczemas, joint and lymphatic system inflammation and edemas, dysfunctions up to total shutdowns of organs functionality, etc. And the cancer tumors are the latest stage of this microparasitic infectious process that develops in 4 stages. First, the protozoa are intravascular and the compensated infection, so they're within the blood vessels. Then they are still in the blood vessels in the so-called decompensated infection stage. Then they migrate from the blood vessels into your connective tissue and organs. This is called the extravascular compensated infection. And the last stage is when they migrate into the stem cells, and this is called the extravascular decompensated infection. And again, watch our previous video with live footage of this protozoa and what the stem cells try to do with them, etc. Very interesting. We don't have time in this presentation for it, but I'm going to link it in the description box below for you. What are some of the symptoms of this microparasitical infection? Well, your blood quality changes, so the viscosity increases, the erythrocytes clump and lose their biconcave shape, the cell's superficial tension decreases due to the changes in the electrical charges, and the oxygen transport is also severely hampered, which leads to cell death. Also, the blood circulation is significantly impaired. Infected erythrocytes lose hemoglobin, they go into anemic states, glucose and plasma and protein serum, as well as cholesterol. And all of these substances are now, of course, missing in the host metabolism. And this is why cancer patients have diabetes 2 very often, also anemia or even leukemia, also high cholesterol and globulin values. They are also cyanotic, undernourished, tired, fatigued, and toxic. Also, hyperplasia sets in, which develops to enhance the stem cells division and proliferation actually. It's followed soon by hypoplasia, and leukemia is one of the consequences of a blood hypoplasia. Also, erythrocytes and lymphocytes counts diminish because the dead cells and the cellular debris are swimming in the bloodstream. Also, capillary permeability is reduced and general capillary circulation is impaired more and more. You will also see high blood pressure and different other cardiovascular conditions might appear. The gases cannot be purged, oxygen cannot permeate the capillaries, and blood is under-oxygenated. And also the cellular debris cannot be excreted. That's why cancer patients go into this toxic state. Also, the infected blood plasma is leaking out into the connective tissue, so it goes extravascular and into the organs. And protozoa are now infecting the lymphatic vessels as well as the lymph nodes, the endocrine glands, the cartilages, the organs. And in this stage, 2 or 3, or the extravascular compensated stage, that's what's happening. Also, the blood vessels are either too dilated or too constricted or obstructed. Some are completely blocked. Aneurysms may therefore appear to support blood circulation. Other side effects of these plasmodial infections are microinfarction, necrosis, obturation, chronic heart insufficiency, heart arrhythmia, valve insufficiency, and it may go as far as a heart attack or a stroke. And the microparasitic invasion in the lymphatic system also leads to swollen, painful lymph nodes. Let's also try to give you a better understanding of how those stem cells proliferate, so this atypical mitosis, and how this leads to the creation of tumors when they are infected with those microparasites. As we've mentioned, the mutated cells are the result of the microparasitic invasion of the stem cells, and to get rid of the parasites, the stem cells start to overproliferate. The protozoa-invaded stem cells lose their correct genetic information and mutation starts to occur, and this is what pathologists see under the microscopes, and this is why they often talk about the mutations. When foreign parasitic DNA material interferes with our own human DNA, the proliferation and cellular division is potentiated with the aim to save our own DNA and of course discard the invader's DNA. Spontaneous cancer remission is actually a longer process than considered initially and is triggered when the protozoa infection was completely healed. And Dr. Weber demonstrated that mitosis in cancer cases is actually not endogenic and genetically controlled, but exogenic, meaning based on infectious degree of the hosting organism. The cells may divide, forming new multiple nuclei cells like in leprosy or syphilis. And when the body is depleted of nutrients, mitosis abruptly stops and the cells going to die. The brain, the blood and the liver are the most resistant organs in this sense, and the kidneys and the lungs are the most fragile ones. The first cancer manifestations after this protozoa infection, after they've gone into the fourth stage of their evolution, they appear on the skin in shape of exanthemas, rashes, eczemas, and our skin-dependent organs such as the mucosa membrane, the epithelial layer, the hairs, the nails. You might notice acne, rosacea, psoriasis, scleroderma, or syphilis skin rash. And at the stage 2 and 3 of the parasitic infection, fever and night sweats appear, whereby the sweats are outside and inside the body, affecting dramatically different organs, which are now being damaged. Dr. Weber also found that these protozoa exist in all patients with polyarthritis, osteoporosis, rheumatism, kidney and liver disorders, lung conditions, dermatologic conditions, psychological and mental conditions. So, armed with all of this knowledge about the real causes of cancers, all of the wrong dogmas that surround cancer and why we haven't come to a real cure yet, let's sum it all up and see what a correct cancer therapy must look like. So what have we learned first? Cancer cells, as we've seen, are always nonpolar, which is the opposite to a healthy cell, which is always a dipole. So it works like a battery. It has a plus and a minus pole. So the correct maintenance of the cell polarity is definitely required for the development and the homeostasis of all metazones. The cell polarity mechanisms are responsible for the regulation of the asymmetric cell divisions of the stem cells, as we've seen, and therefore a disruption of the cell polarity is a hallmark of cancer. Furthermore, recent evidence shows that loss of cell polarity is intimately involved in cancer creation. Secondly, cancer cells thrive through fermentation of glucose, as we've seen. And the metabolism of a primitive unicellular protozoa that has adapted from aquatic life is this fermentation state. Therefore, the lack of phosphorylation pathways makes cancer cell craving for glucose, and the lack of their energy is compensated by stealing up to 800 times their normal amount of energy from the healthy cells, so we must address that. Third, the genetic mutations that are often discussed when it comes to cancer are due to a DNA exchange between these microparasites, the protozoa, and our human stem cells during the cancer tumor proliferations. That means that you are not born with the genetic mutations and a predisposition for cancer. Fourth is there is always a protozoa reinfection risk. So treating the microparasites, the protozoa, once does not create permanent immunity. We always have this protozoa in us. We always have to keep them in check. So with that knowledge in the background, let's come to a correct cancer therapy. What do we need to do? Well, cancer starts always with an unexpected psycho-emotional conflict in your life, as we've seen. So first thing you need to do is find a resolution to these conflicts. There is no way around that. Secondly, first and most important action in a cancer therapy must be the repolarization of the sick cells. And this also implies an increase in the cellular membrane potential to 70 millivolts. This requires therapies that make electrons available. And the best therapy to achieve this is galvanic therapy with the Veget balance, link in the description box below for you. Also, we need to stop the fermentation by sugar starving and re-establishing a 36 ATP metabolism based on glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, which is the correct way to improve the mitochondrial respiration. And here, a ketogenic nutrition as well as intermittent fasting that leads to autophagy can help. Also, we need to stop the development of cancer from a microparasitic intravascular infection in the blood vessels to a protozoa extravascular migration from the blood vessels into your connective tissue, and finally to a protozoa extravascular decompensated infection by invasion of your stem cells. Cancer development as a protozoan infection cycle is very similar to malaria, and that's why one treatment that was great for malaria can also help you greatly with your cancer. That is vivid artemisinin therapy, link in the description box below for you where you can get it. Also, when the microparasite infection has been eradicated, the genetic mutations can be reversed through a healthy lifestyle and a regular matrix regeneration therapy. And again, link in the description box below for you for a great matrix regeneration therapy device. We must also optimize our pH, redox potential and conductivity using the right supplements, detox and milieu terrain therapy methods. For some of the greatest supplements, you know you can get them at lyra.me, link also in the description box below. And if possible, try to avoid biopsies and surgeries. You are just spreading the protozoa infection faster by doing those surgeries. Also, chemotherapy and radiation are toxic, non-efficient treatments, and very much they destroy your health forever, so try to avoid them. But of course, in the end, this is just a recommendation. It's up to you. If you believe in them, go ahead and do them. We recommend that you look for other methods. And by the way, treating cancer, as you can see from this list, is not a single way approach. So it doesn't help only to change your diet, as many people suggest. Oh, you just go the nutritional way and this will help you get rid of your cancer. It's not enough. It's not enough to find a resolution of a conflict, even though this is one of the foundations. It's not enough to do galvanic therapy only. You must do all of those together. You must change your whole lifestyle and perform all these therapies in order to successfully address this condition. And if you have any questions about any of the subjects in these presentations, please do contact us. Do not hesitate. We love to talk to you and advise you on what is best for you. Shop at lyra.com. The complete contact information, including our toll-free phone number, is also going to be in the description box below. If you need the correct diagnosis and also want to have a customized therapy that fits your particular needs, I highly recommend that you also enroll to our health and wellness services, where we will accompany you through all of your process of getting healthy again until you have achieved your aims. If you've enjoyed this presentation, please also support our work by liking, sharing and subscribing. Also, do not forget to hit the notification button. We come out with holistic health subjects like this every week, so make sure that you don't miss out on any of our new content. And with all that being said, please stay healthy. Until next time.